I'm sorry that I couldn't prepare a slideshow, but I'll try to summarize the historical logic of development of Bulgarian theater, transferring, of course, to the current situation. But before that, let me give my answer. What unites these countries which are gathered under the initiative 3Cs? And my answer is close to the answer of my colleague from Tartu. It's important to realize the historical background, because all our countries during the previous centuries, 19 and 20, they succeed to win their independence, leaving three empires in this region: Austro-Hungarian Empire, Russian Empire, and Ottoman Empire. And this fact imprints a lot on our societies and, of course, to our cultures. Of course, there are cultural differences, because the three empires were very different culturally. And also, we have in mind always the real situation after the Second World War, because most of our countries, they remain in the Soviet bloc, some partially, some entirely. Here, the exceptions are Austria and Greece, and of course, this special type of communism which the former Yugoslavia had. But nevertheless, there are similarities between Eastern Europe and Western Balkans. So, of course, our common path in the EU now also create bridges between us. And the 20th century left to Bulgarian culture and to the theater in particular the same heritage as the whole region received. Periods of democracies and dictatorships, periods of nationalisms and traditionalism, but also of modernizations. For Bulgaria, these were periods of sharp collisions between individual and collectivistic attitudes, but at the same time, compatibility of urban and rural cultures, of industrial and agrarian myths. A specific basic characteristic of Bulgarian theater is the fact that it played an important role in the process which we adopted as a national renaissance. It happened during the 19th century. And this fact determines, to a great extent, the role that theater had in Bulgarian society throughout the whole 20th century, loaded with the ideas of the Enlightenment and Romanticism. Theater was perceived by the new independent Bulgarian state as an instrument that it is a part of national identity. And the national theater, our national theater, was founded as earlier as the first decade of the 20th century. It was an ambitious and very expensive project. The famous Austrian architecture studio, Fellner and Helmer, was commissioned. And that's why the National Theater in Sofia is very similar to the National Theater in Zagreb and Rijeka, and very similar to the theaters in our countries, of course, in Austria, in Hungary, in Czech Republic, in Slovakia, in Poland, in Ukraine, in Romania. By the way, this is also our common cultural heritage. But to continue with summarizing the Bulgarian theater heritage from 20th century, between the First and the Second World Wars, many city theaters were created in most of the bigger towns in Bulgaria. They were repertory theaters and followed the aesthetic and organizational principles of the national theater. Together with them, there are also private theater companies. Most of them were touring companies following the model of the entrepreneurial theater. During this period, the National Theatre was very creative, and you heard yesterday from our Polish colleagues that Adam Mickiewicz, Forefathers' Eve, created by Leon Schiller, was made in Sofia, and it was a very big event because it made enormous impression over Bulgarian audience. After 2 or 3 years, after Leon Schiller, there was another foreign famous stage director, this one from Croatia, Branko Gavela. He put on stage Shakespeare's Winter's Tale. So these were part of the very interesting international collaborations between the National Theatre and other part of our countries. Not without the influence of the cultural models of the 30s in Germany and Italy. In Bulgaria in 1942 came out the first theater law in Bulgaria. It provided an increase of the state subsidies for theater, but at the price of certain limitations of their freedom, of course. Looking for an answer to the question that the organizers of our conference put, where we should view our theater cultures as secondary to Western Europe and Russia, for this period I can briefly conclude like this. Both Bulgarian drama and theatrical practice took models from Europe and Russia. For example, the model of the modern drama of Ibsen and Strindberg, or the stage models of Stanislavski and Reinhardt, but managed to integrate these patterns into own cultural tradition. It was a dichotomy between a sought-after national style and European modernism. The disintegration of this creative cultural tradition occurred after the Second World War. Then took place a nationalization of the theater system. There were no private companies or theaters after that. It happened in 1949. And even the municipal theater were transformed in, state-owned theaters. By the way, this is the reason why, till today, most of the public-supported theaters in Bulgaria are state. We have a few municipal theaters. The communist doctrine, culture for the people, led to an extensive development of the theater net in the country during this period. Thus, the changes which occurred after 1989 found Bulgaria with 35 drama and 20 puppet repertory theaters. What happened? We need to differentiate between the democratic model of the Maison de la Culture, initiated by André Malraux in France, who, convinced by the arguments of the political left, sought decentralization of culture from one side, and the huge cultural infrastructure in Eastern Europe developed in the communist era to keep people within a single ideological paradigm. But, on the other hand, this policy have created theater spaces used today as a distribution network. After the mid-50s, in the last century, the brutal ideological repression was changed by much more sophisticated means of control. But what mattered in this case was that due to the partial freedom granted to Bulgarian culture and theater, in the aftermath, a specific hybrid theater language emerged, which was kept in existence to the end of the regime. It incorporated features of Stanislavski theater as a mode of stage representation, and Brecht theater as a communication with the audience, a hybrid theater of ideological correctness and allegorical criticism of real life. In the middle of the 80s, among the theater practitioners began a debate about the need to reform the bureaucratic and uniform system of the repertory theaters in the country. At that time, the Bulgarian theater lived through a so-called neo-avant-garde wave, we could say so, which together with the aesthetic manifestos brought forward the question of radical theater reform. With this hope, the theater circles met the political changes in 1989. But having the real conditions, economic crisis, and sharp social contradictions, the way between the manifestos and the real practical steps was too long. One way or another, however, immediately after the changes, there emerged a number of private theater formations, mainly in the capital, of course, whereas the state theater companies were given the freedom in respect to their artistic policies and management. What is the contemporary landscape of Bulgaria after 34 years, a long way from communism to democracy? No one of the state repertory theaters was closed. In some cities, there were mergers between the state drama and puppet theaters, and also in few cities, the state drama theaters were transformed in municipal ownership. The lack of sufficient financial independence of our municipalities slows down the process of decentralization. Step by step, a public financial support was gained for private initiatives and for theater productions implemented as independent projects. Let me differentiate, as we did yesterday in our debate. These private organizations are commercial one or NGO, and of course NGOs, they have artistic, educational, social aims, which commercial ones has not. Where the subsidy for the independent companies comes, the subsidy comes from the Ministry of Culture, and the biggest municipalities in the last year, they also have special programs for the independent theater companies, not only theater, but cultural NGOs. And also very important role plays National Culture Fund, which has programs for young people, emerging artists, for drama, for criticism, and of course for productions. As a rule, these supports are insufficient to realize more ambitious theater projects. Therefore, financial support from other sources is often sought. In the 90s, the independent theater sector relied on more subsidies from foreign cultural centers, predominantly European, as well as foreign cultural funds such as Soros Center, the Swiss Cultural Program in Bulgaria, and others. After Bulgaria's accession to the EU, the financial support from these centers and programs decreased or even disappeared, but the opportunities for participation in European cultural programs increased. Immediately after the changes, there were many theater makers who decided to be independent. Then, independent meant to become freelancer or to be member of an alternative group with people sharing the same theater spirit. Most of them discovered the pleasure in the beginning and the desperation after some time to be independent. But nevertheless, this striving for an independent existence paved the way to new aesthetic territories for Bulgarian theater, such as documentary theater, verbatim theater, devising theater, physical theater and contemporary dance, different performative stage forms, etc. The real problem that remains to this day is that the independent formations are not sustainable. Out of the number of independent theater groups which emerged after the changes, only the Sfumato Theater Workshop succeeded to obtain its own building and has long-lasting existence, but it was possible after it was transformed into a state structure. And this is the only case. Let me explain that Sfumato is probably the most internationally known Bulgarian theater formation. Created in 1989, they still maintain their profile as theater laboratory, led by two interesting directors such as Margarita Mladenova and Ivan Dobchev. During the last decade, they opened the door for emerging artists and for their projects. Mentioning the last decade, I want to emphasize the biggest challenge, in my opinion, to the Bulgarian theater today. It is related to a radical change in the way of subsidizing the state theaters, and they, as I indicated, continue to be dominant in the theatrical life. Now, the subsidy for each state theater is calculated on the basis of the tickets sold. This sharply orientated the state theaters towards commercial behavior, and they hardly took risks with new names and new plays. As we know, the purpose of public subsidies is to support those productions that do not set purely market goals. And with this policy, the opposite happens. Public subsidies are redirected to commercial productions. And moreover, politicians from all parties like that because they say, this is the people's choice. This is a very dangerous, according to me, for the art, but it earns money for the people in the state theater. This principle do not refer to the support for the independent companies and projects for the theater festivals and other initiatives, but they have to rely on the principle, slightly more or as much as the support was last year. It is this imbalance in targeting financial resources for theatrical activity, which also changes the aesthetic picture of the Bulgarian theater as a whole, that worries me at the most at this moment. Of course, everything depends on the level of aspirations of the individual person or the individual organization. I could mention, for example, independent organization like Derrida Dance Center in Sofia, which has existed for more than 10 years, creating contemporary dance productions and also giving space for other dance companies. Or the Studio for Documentary Theater, Vox Populi, founded in 2012, which continues successively its work on current social and political topics that excite society. I must mention the Center for Contemporary Arts, so-called Toplo Centrala in Bulgarian, which was a joint initiative between a group of artists from the independent art scene and Sofia municipality. It was launched in 2014, and the main idea was to transform a former heat plant into a space for performing arts. The project culminated successfully in the summer of 2021, 2 years ago, and opened its doors for independent projects and artists. Interesting artistic turn could be observed in the very center of the conservative state theater system. During the last 4 years, the National Theatre opened its stage to some internationally recognized directors. Yesterday we mentioned several times Jernej Lorenzi from Slovenia. He came and he staged a performance on the theme of mythological hero Orpheus, on motifs from the Iliad and also the opera of Gluck, Orpheus and Eurydice, and also of personal stories from the actors. It was a very successful project. Or again, Timofey Kulabin, the Russian director who left his country after the Russian invasion in Ukraine. He was invited last autumn to put on stage Ibsen's A Doll's House, in which the dialogue between characters was via cell phones, messages, and with subtitles for the audience. And just 2 months ago, the staging of the play of Ukrainian playwright Sasha Denisova, Hague, took place, created by Galin Stoev. Galin Stoev is a Bulgarian stage director who has been working in France for many years, and now he is the manager of the theater in Toulouse. Hague, which refers to an imaginary trial against Putin and his entourage before the International Criminal Court in Hague, was a brilliant mixture of documentary theater and absurdist grotesque. So, at the National Theatre in Sofia, we could see under the same roof creative contemporary theater language as well as traditional theater. Personally, I want to see more of this practice in the other state theaters in the country. Last but not least, I want to mention the international festivals which has sustainable presence in the field. The biggest one in the dance field is One Dance Week, which is held every May in the town of Plovdiv. The biggest one, international festivals, I mean only, with very pure international profile. In puppetry, it is Festival Piero, which is it is a biennial festival, and it is held every September, not every, but on 2 years in September in the town of Stara Zagora. And of course, the International Theatre Festival Varna Summer, which programs drama, dance, and some crossover artistic projects. I have been honored to be its director for many years, and I will not speculate with your attention. You could visit our website, but I only want to share that festivals are a very good place to prolong this collaboration between us in a form of conferences, meetings, and other kind of collaborations. I remember that in 2008 we were hosts of international project SEAS, which was implemented by a Swiss cultural organization, Intercult. The aim was to make a bridge between Baltic and Black Sea. So there are many productions, co-productions from these countries, and the festivals participated in this project were like chain to exchange different performances and conferences also, and other events, of course. So I want also to confirm that in my capacity of a researcher at the Theatre Institute in Sofia, I am also ready to assist and to cooperate for prolongation of this initiative in the research field of drama and performance. Thank you very much for your attention.